there is an element of suspense where I do want the viewer to bring their own story to it. And also be a bit confused by it. There's a lot of little personal stories that I embed into pieces, and sometimes there's just absurdity.
This is Platemark. My name is Anne Schaefer, and I am your host. You have found us at Series 3 of Platemark, in which I'm interviewing the wonderful people who occupy the print ecosystem. Now, that could range from artists to printers to gallerists to print dealers to curators and beyond. Today's guest is Michael Barnes. He is professor of printmaking at Northern Illinois University. I wanted to talk to Michael because he is a lithographer primarily, although he does do other things like etching. But he is really a crack lithographer in my book. He does the most beautiful work, multi-plate, multicolor, they're gorgeous. And I wanted to talk to him because lithography has always been really mysterious to me, I admit it. I know I'm supposed to know everything about this stuff, but lithography has always been behind a curtain for me. And I thought, let's take the chance to really talk it out with somebody. Michael was kind enough to do that with me. Okay, let's see. Housekeeping. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Any images that Michael and I talk about will be available over on the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. Over there, you'll also find a support and donate button. Help me out and support Platemark. Let's see. I think that's it. Buckle up, and here we go. Michael, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming on Platemark.
You're welcome. It's a great pleasure, honor.
Can you start off by introducing yourself for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I'm Michael Barnes. I currently live in Illinois, outside of Chicago. I'm a professor at Northern Illinois University. I've been teaching here for 25 years, and I'm an artist printmaker. I do a lot of lithographies. My pronouns are he, him. We live on Potawatomi lands here in Illinois. I must have just missed you because we drove down for the last day of the show, and we actually ran into Marianne and Ted in the parking lot, along with Dave Gill.
So for listeners, we're talking about the show that was at the St. Louis Art Museum, Catching the Moment, was the collection of Ted and Marianne Simmons, and you were heavily featured in it. They collected you quite thoroughly, I think.
Yeah, they have over 70 works of mine in the collection.
Which is, of course, not everything, I can tell.
No, it's not everything, but they have a good survey.
So did they contact you and say, hey, Michael, what do you got?
Yeah, I met Marianne a number of years ago when I was a graduate student at the University of Iowa. I was doing a workshop out in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and Marianne was one of the faculty with Joan Hall and Donald Farnsworth, where they were doing paper making and printing, and I met her there, and then a number of years later, Huck had organized an event at the St. Louis Contemporary Art Museum, I think it was a Prince Gone Wild or one of the variations of the Outlaw Printmaker shows, and we all had tables set up. I was there with Bill Fick sharing a table, and Marianne came by. I believe she was with Ted, and I had a bunch of little etchings, and she bought a bunch of my etchings and then contacted me a number of years later, and Ted really liked them and wanted to get more. And then they came to my studio a few times and have purchased a lot of my work over the years. So I'm very, very honored they believe in me and made me part of that wonderful collection. So.
They do have good taste.
Yeah, I like to think
That's right. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because recently somebody who shall remain nameless kind of smacked me for bad-mouthing lithography on the podcast. And so I wanted to go straight to who I consider to be a preeminent lithographer, Michael Barnes, and have you help me change my mind.
Okay, I'll do my best.
So as a curator, you're supposed to know how everything's made. So I get the gist of it, the oil and water don't mix thing. But I think if you can do it in layman's terms and not get too geeky on us, can you help the listeners understand exactly what's going on with lithography?
Yeah, sure. It's a chemical printing process, so it is based on the fact that grease and water repel one another. So it was invented by Alois Sennefelder in 1796 through 98. He'd been experimenting a lot with relief printing. He was an actor playwright. His father was an actor in the Munich Acting Guild, and he tried his hand at acting and found it was kind of a tough life. So he turned to playwriting and had a couple of plays published and performed. And he was finding further publication difficult. So he turned to learning how to print, to self-publish. So he was one of the early self-publishers. And he did a lot of experimentations of transferring images onto stone to print in relief. He was really etching the hell out of the stones. So that was like a woodcut and printing it in relief. So there's examples of some of the early sheet music was one of the things they printed earlier on. And he would engrave copper and print the copper plate and then transfer that to stone. And then the famous story is of him and his mother gave him a laundry list, and he didn't have a piece of paper to write it down on. So he had a stone prepared in the studio, Bavarian limestone, which comes from Nuremberg, near Nuremberg, Solnhofen, which is a couple hours from Munich. So it was a common stone, for flooring and using for slabs of whatever. And he was experimenting printing from that, and he got it wet somehow and rained on it, or he poured water on it, and he discovered that the water rolled off his inky drawing fluid that he'd used to write out the laundry list. So that's the famous story. He's recorded that in the book that he wrote on lithography. So the ink is oil-based. It sticks to the drawing, which is traditionally an oil-based drawing, and then the background is treated with a acidic gum solution, which renders it impervious to further grease and retains a film of water. So you have grease and water. And if you create the perfect chemical balance, you can ink the stone up while keeping it wet. So lithographers, we say, keep it wet, dude. And, if it dries out, everything rolls up. So that's kind of the basic principles of it. The photo was invented in mid-1800s, and then photographic printing processes started. Photographic techniques came along, which led to the use of the halftone and photographic plates. So if you look at circus posters, are kind of an interesting historical thing to look at. You can see the early ones from the 1800s into the early 1900s. They have the dot pattern of the stone, the grain of this natural grain of the stone, and then 1920s, 30s, they start to move into halftone patterns. So they would separate photographically. So modern day lithography, which was, is used for most of our commercial printing, screen printing is used a lot as well. It turned to offset printing. So it moved from the traditional stones into offset printing for a lot of posters, magazines, newspapers. It transplanted letterpress for newspaper and book printing for the commercial realm. And then the modern day, it's moved into more digital printing. The digital printers have gotten so good that they have kind of are pushing out our beloved traditional lithography. But when stones were phased out, a lot of stones, it was, kept as something dear and near to the fine artists that loved working on stone. But they got rid of a lot of the stones and all these shops. I grew up in Michigan, and there's stories that all the Detroit presses threw their stones in the Detroit River. So the bottom of the river is lined with these beautiful old big litho stones. Fortunately, a lot of them were picked up by school shops and contract shops, and there's a lot more of them in Europe because all the stones were, most of the stones were shipped from Europe. They were quarried in either Solnhofen in Germany is the famous one, and then there's some quarries in France. And we even had a quarry in the United States in Stone City, Iowa. I think it's where Grant Wood's from. They kind of hit it late, but there is a quarry there, and they started quarrying litho stones. But it was right around that time that stone lithography was phasing into aluminum plate lithography, offset printing. So they probably used the quarry for quarrying flooring material, flooring stones and such. But
I did not know that. You've just I had no idea. I thought it was one quarry in Germany, and I thought it was all quarried out and you could never get another one ever again. But there might be some hope in America.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough stones around. There was that famous vault in Ohio that they opened up that had 1,000 litho stones that were buried in somebody's backyard.
Wait. Tell us that story.
I think it was a social media phenomenon. These people discovered a vault in their backyard, and it was basically filled up with hundreds of litho stones. They were old commercial stones that had images on them of all different sorts. They were mostly 16 by 20 stones in various sizes. Probably a lot of them some of them were broken, but they got to the point where they wanted to get this out of their backyard. So they offered the stones for $20 a piece. Originally they wanted, a little bit higher prices. And so they weren't selling them quite as quickly, but then people just kind of flooded there. It was during the pandemic. So I tried to get over there, but I I have so many stones, I don't need more stones, but it's when you hear about
Sorry.
stones, you're just like, you're like a little kid. It's like, oh, I need more. I need more. I'm going to build a castle out of them. And I had just previously driven my friend Andrew Mullally, who teaches in Utica, New York. We'd taken like 2 trips to Cleveland to buy some stones, and we drove up to Wisconsin to buy some stones. So we ended up with a pile of stones ourselves that we sold some, we kept some for ourselves, and I contacted him and was like, you want to go to Ohio? So we had these jokes about, going to Cleveland because it was just there and back in a U-Haul, and it was fun. But
I assume that people who listen to Platemark are already print geeks, but just in case, when you make an image on a lithographic stone, you can erase it basically and keep using the stone until it hits a certain thinness, at which point it will break, right?
Yeah, and you can even back the stones with slate.
Oh.
Senefelder actually experimented with making stone paper, where he would use ground up limestone and then treat paper with it. They were sort of like transfer papers. He did transfer lithography very early on, where they would draw on a piece of paper that had a gum coating that would then transfer onto the lithostone. And then aluminum plates were, even zinc plates were the popular thing in Europe, and they still use zinc to this day. It's less common. We use ball grained aluminum plates. So they put aluminum on a big platform, and Takish Press is kind of the main manufacturer of them. And then the machine rocks the plates, and these little ball bearings and grit go around the plate and etch the plate or pit it out, kind of like a lithostone. So the lithostone you can use over and over again, as you said, and you grain it with a steel disc or another stone. I use glass.
Glass.
I use they're like old paperweights. Sometimes I'll use those for fine. So you take it. It's like sandpaper. You start with a coarse grit and work down to like a 220 or a 320 to get a nice smooth surface. So that then you do the drawing with a grease pencil, and the pencil's kind of a waxy. It has soap and wax and beeswax, stearic acid, carnauba wax, and lamp black pigment. The original recipes are in Senefelder's book. It calls for spermaceti, which is like it's the oil from the nasal passage of the sperm whale. So you can't get that anymore. And I think you can probably get arrested even trying to get it. So, and I've been making my own crayons. So I always joke my secret ingredients is grizzly bear sperm. So
Sorry.
Really hard. It's hard to come by, but it's dangerous.
Well, I was going to ask you about this, about the crayons or pencils or whatever you want to call them. I mean, are there like 2 companies in the world that are still making those things, and you've resorted to making your own, or is it just that you feel like your formula is better?
Yeah, I'm leaning to the side here. I'll show you my pencils here.
Show and tell time.
Stone's Crayons was bought out by Graphic Chemicals, so they still make pencils, and Korn's still make pencils. Those are kind of the 2 primary commercial suppliers. Charbonnel used to make pencils and crayons. Charbonnel's, since that's based in France, a lot of those materials have become harder to get because of labeling issues and EPA issues. They have to get a bunch of tests and approval done of the toxicity of and labeling of the inks. So a lot of their inks have become, even etching inks have become more difficult for us to get. So it's a good excuse to go to Paris and buy a bunch of ink, fill your suitcase.
Wait a minute, hold on. So the supply chain is not a problem because the ships aren't running because they have no fuel. It's because there's a holdup in testing the materials within the ink and the crayons. That's a problem.
I'm not positive. I don't want to get in trouble by saying things. I'm not sure, what I had heard is that sort of their license to ship things, they have to meet the certain environmental protection labeling standards. Some of it's like California laws in different states. Some of it was some difficulty with that is what I heard. A lot of the issues we have are just these materials with all of printmaking. The companies that we rely on for whatever you get used to can get bought out or go out of business, trade hands. Daniel Smith was one such company. Everybody loved Daniel Smith etching ink and the creamy French black. And they just decided to phase out all their printmaking supplies. So I was on sabbatical that year, and I was in France, and my colleague contacted me and said, we need to order a bunch of inks. And everybody else knew that. They were phasing out their printmaking inks and such. And so everybody bought up everything they had. So we got a few cans. But, the relief ink was wonderful. But the litho pencils, I started coming back around. So I like a rabbit.
Okay.
This is one of my litho pencils. Huh. It's a pencil. It's a wax crayon, and I've made thousands of these at this point. So I made my own mold, and I have several friends that are making them. A lot of people have started making their own crayons. One of my former students, Eric Wilson, makes these, and Eric topped me. It's called T-Bar Ranch. He's in Chicago now, and he made really fancy box, and he has a really fancy mold, and his pencils are all labeled. Mine are all kind of crusty. And
but are you selling them? I mean, I assume that your friend in Chicago is selling them, but are you selling yours?
I've been asked to sell them, and I don't want to get in. I'm an artist. I want to focus on my work. I started making them for myself, and then it's actually kind of fun. I kind of get into the process, as you might be able to tell. And so I researched a lot of the old recipes. There's a wonderful book by Bolton Brown, 1920s or so. Bolton Brown was a famous printer who did a lot of printing for George Bellows and other artists in New York, and did a lot of his own work too. Fabulous artist, a lot of landscapes. He did this lecture about lithography, and he did a lot of experimentation. He made like hundreds of recipes on crayons, and he has these descriptions about one where the artist he gave it to took a stone outside, was drawing on a stone, and it started to rain, and the water would run right off the crayon, and he could keep drawing. So he had a lot of the recipes in his book. Sennefelder's book and some of the old books have recipes, but they're, like I said, spermaceti, and some of the old materials are called different things now, and the measurements are, hard to decipher, and most of it's in German or French.
Right. It's like baking out of a British cookbook, right? Like, what do you mean you weigh that flour? What are you talking about? Yeah, exactly.
So anyways, I took a bunch of those recipes and started playing around and making up different batches. Oh, the fun story with this is that I started in this because my mom bought my niece a Crayola crayon maker for Christmas. And it's this little gadget thing where you take your old Crayola crayons and you put them inside this machine, and it's just like the best thing for kids because it has this little hot oven in it, and you pour hot molten wax, and it's just like, wow, that sounds really safe. It had little molds you stick inside, and then it really is pretty safe. It had little safety latches on it. I had to cut those off so I could actually open it, and then I burnt myself really bad. I poured the hot crayon, burnt my hand. But they would form little crayons that had the swirly colors from all your crayons. And so I was really jealous, and I asked my mom to give me one also. And so I made my first crayons just with all the old nubs and shavings from my leftovers. And then I said, well, why don't I learn to make a mold and start making my own crayons? I've been making them for my students now because they're pretty easy to make, and I can make big batches, but I don't want to sell them. I'm not a good business person.
Fair enough. So before I roll you back around to the aluminum plate situation, can you tell people that there is a way to make lithographs with something that's liquidy instead of the crayon?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course. Some of the other materials are called touche, so it's ink. Basically, if you take your crayons and melt them into a liquid form, there's water-soluble and there's solvent-soluble ones. June Wayne's early prints, she did this process on zinc plates, and it's I can't remember the term for it, but it's like skin of the toad was what it referred to, and it has this beautiful texture to it. She, of course, was the founder of Tamarind in Los Angeles that moved to New Mexico, the famous lithographic printer training institution, part of the University of New Mexico now. But yeah, if you want some sources on people who really do amazing washes, and of course, Wayne Kimball, and one of the experts on the wash techniques. A lot of people now use Xerox toner powder. They'll mix up Xerox toner powder and make solutions out of that. You can paint that on aluminum plates and even stones.
That sounds easier than melting down your crayons.
They make touches. So they make a touche, which comes in like a can form. It's like a cake, and then you mix hot water into it, stir it up, or you can mix solvent spirits or alcohol. They make it in liquid form as well. Most of that's sold by Corns. Corns Crayons carries that. And then Trilobite Press is one that makes a really nice paste touche that's currently available.
Currently available, as possibly by the time this is produced and on the air, maybe not.
One can of touche will last you years, so you just buy a couple of cans and you have enough for life.
Really?
That's the other problem with making crayons. How much can you sell one crayon for? To make can I retire being a crayon maker?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Well, so with the touche, the reason I am drawn to it, because I'm a amateur watercolorist, not even amateur, I dabble sometimes, but I love the puddling and the pooling and the edges of the lake and, all of that stuff. And you can get that effect with the touche lithography, which is actually perfect because the whole scenario is about drawing, right? I mean, it's the print technique that is the most like drawing.
Yeah. My graduate professor, Robert Glasgow, always would say that it's the medium that can really duplicate just about any other drawing medium. And he'd show us slides. He'd show like a Max Beckmann, which looked like a dry point, looked like a graphite or a crayon drawing. Then we'd look at a George Roald that looked like a pen and ink drawing. And there's these beautiful Delacroix prints that are from the Faust illustrations. I actually have a few of those in my collection, which are wonderful. He did little doodles at the side of the stone, that were erased later from the margins. But it's wonderful to see, the variety of techniques that can be used. And then when you throw the digital and photo technology into it, you can do just about anything. One of the things I really grew up as an etcher. When I got into printmaking, I was just blown away by we had some visiting artists come to my undergrad school, Elma College in Michigan. David Becker and Evan Summer were artists that came in my formative years, and they both do these. David Becker made these fantastic figurative big etchings that were all hand stippled and just super detailed. And then Evan Summer combines engraving, these really dark, almost post-apocalyptic kind of landscapes mixed with collograph, which is an additive technique where you can paint glue materials to the collograph or collage. And he's still very active making fantastic prints. And those are a couple of the people that really got me fired up about making prints, because I had no idea what printmaking was. I love listening to Huck's stories about, finding the Durer books laying around and, things under his parents' bed. We had a Bible story books. So I had a weird, creepy pictures of giant, God's hand coming down off a cliff, and I had plenty of weird images, but it was kind of in the sort of the Protestant versions of things.
Well, so where were you when you first figured out that prints were something?
I think it was at Evan Summers' lecture that he did at my undergrad school. David Becker was there, I think, the year before, and I was a freshman, and I was distracted with, college. I think I missed his lecture. I don't know what I was doing, but I saw his print that he'd left with the collection and then fell in love with that. I think it was when Evan brought a bunch of prints along and had them laying on the table, and I was looking at them, and I was just like, wow, what is this? My professor was like, yeah, you should take printmaking. So Kent Kirby was my first professor, kind of directed me towards printmaking. I did etchings all the way through grad school, and I still dabble in it. But once I got into lithography, again, going back to what you're saying with drawing and the fluidity, there's delays in the process. You have to put it on and process the stone. Just like woodcuts, you have to draw it on the block and cut it out and print it. But it just felt more fluid to me, and I love to draw. So that's kind of it. I was sold once I started making litho.
So every technique has these steps and stages and transitions from, the drawing to the plate or block or wood. But I've always heard that lithography is magic and that it can go south in a hot second.
Yeah. Well, it can.
So, not that anything's particularly predictable, although I suppose woodcutting would be the most predictable one because it's much more direct. You carve and then ink. But I can understand the attraction to lithography because you basically are drawing. But the technical parts and the chemistry sounds so. I'm not a chemist, so intimidating for me, I guess is the way to put it. But I guess once you get the hang of it, do you muck up a stone every now and again or a plate?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing lithography for probably 30 some years now, so it's I have a good handling of what I want to do with it, but I can still mess things up. To teach it, you really have to know it to do it well, because you can do whatever you want with your own stone, and if you mess it up, you mess it up. You've tried to fix it. But the way I teach it is I've loosened up on teaching it. I learned it in a very kind of scientific, kind of almost a Tamarind way of learning lithography. And you have to rosin and talc. You have to do your etches a certain way. You have to wash out, rub up, roll up, the law, the lithotina asphaltum water, fold your cheesecloths the right way. Through working in shops around the world, working with other printers, and just, taking in as much as I can, I've developed a more fluid approach to it. I'm comfortable I can do just about whatever I want to do. And then working with you talked a little bit about master printers, working collaboratively with artists. I've done some of that. I never wanted to be a master printer, but I do enjoy working with artists on occasion. We did a big project with Diane Victor, who is a South African artist, and did a monster lithograph with her. And we introduced her to the manière noir process. One of my grad students who had worked with her in France introduced her to that, and she just ran with it.
Can you describe what manière noir means?
The black manner. So it's an old French lithographic technique, but it's called the black manner because it's kind of like litho mezzotint, if you can imagine that. So you make the stone black, and then you scratch into it and bring out your highlights and etch that. The beauty of it is you can get really super fine scratch marks, scratch details, and then you can also get all those tonal ranges. I learned that from a printer, Josef Budka, in Poland, when I went over there on a study abroad trip. And the Europeans have used this a lot, Eastern Central Europeans especially, Russian, Slovakian, and Polish, and many other countries, but they use an asphaltum process where they coat the stone just with asphaltum. So it's almost like working on an etching. You can erase and scratch and get really nice tonal variations with the process. So I've done a lot of research, just kind of personal research on that. And some, it's something I started teaching as part of my litho classes, and students always love it. You scratch, it's just nothing like drawing on a stone or scratching on a stone. So that process mixed with the drawing and the touche and things like that. But getting back to the master printing, I've worked with artists like Diane to print projects when they're visiting artists at Northern. When they come in and work, they work with the students. The students help print. I help print. Sometimes the artists help print if they're kind of print oriented.
Is that a program that you guys do under a name of a press for the university?
Yeah, we have Bandolier Press,
okay.
which is that's the student group. So you can find them on Instagram, and they do student fundraisers and go to the conferences and do exhibitions. And so with the printing projects, I do it more under the guise of the university, the print program, but the Bandolier Press is what we consider our publishing side of it. We just did a print with Erica Walker recently. We had Huck in when I think he came in my first semester. I was teaching at NIU in 98. We never finished the stones that he started. We just sat around watching football, drinking 7 and 7. We were both flat broke at the time, so we pulled our money to buy some alcohol to make 7 and 7 up. He brought some blocks with him. It was kind of when he was on his circuit, going around to all the museums to show off the 14 days in August. And he actually had the block. It was the Great American Head Job that he pulled the proof and left it with us. And then he almost left the block at the airport. I get a call from Tom, and he's like, did I leave my block in the shop? And I was like, no, I don't see it around. And he left it at security in the airport. And fortunately, they got it back to him.
Yikes, that's frightening.
We didn't publish a print with Tom, but he did do some demos.
Right.
But so I've done that a little bit. I like making my own work. I like once in a while printing with an artist who I like, whose work I like. I think when you get in the profession of being a master printer, you're, sometimes you have to do the work that you're presented, especially if you're a contract printer and somebody's hiring you, you have to just keep your mouth shut and help them with it, do what they want. And I'm a little too stubborn to do that.
So I take it you have your own press and you don't seek out other shops in which you're the artist working with a collaborative printer.
I've done that a couple of times. I was on a mini Fulbright in Serbia, and I worked with the studio at the academia there, and the two printers there helped me. We pulled a couple of small editions. It was weird for me. I don't work well that way. I kind of wish I could, but I'm so much of a control freak with my work. I was just sitting there drinking coffee, watching them, and I was like, no, do this. They're like, you get away.
I think most printmakers are not control freaks, but like you're basically scientists, definitely problem solvers. You have to, True keeps his shop. He's like a shipwright. Everything has a place, and everything's in its place. Like it's very organized people that are printmakers, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I don't know about that. You're looking at my shop here. It's a disaster most times, but I know where everything's at. So,
do you have just one press, or do you have more than one?
I have 3 presses in here. If you see behind me here, I have it's an offset direct to plate press that I just got a year ago, and this is the traditional technology that offset printing. They would use it to proof stones, and so there's an old stone on there that has old Milwaukee labels, and I'll get up closer.
Oh, cool.
This is one of the stones I got from Wisconsin, of course. So these are beer labels that they'd print to put on bottles, and I have one stone that has old bottle caps, so the ink gets transferred onto this roller here. Try not to make you dizzy. This roller goes over the stone and transfers the ink onto the roller, the rubber blanket, and then the paper goes here and here and gets transferred from the rubber blanket onto the paper. So that's a flatbed offset press. So you can put the stone right in the press.
I see. So just to make sure everybody's with us on the offset part. So the circumference of the roller has to be as long as the block or the stone, because it's going to pick up the entire image in one go, and then the paper comes on and it just puts it right back down.
Yeah. So this is where printing moved after sort of direct printing from a stone or a plate, and a lot of us still print from hand presses where we print directly from the stone or plate, like the Takish presses or Charles Brand presses. You put the stone on the press, you put the paper on the stone. Offset presses were developed to print faster so that the rubber blanket could pick up the image from the stone and then transfer it to the paper. So it created a little less friction on the stone so the image wouldn't break down. They could print bigger runs.
Oh, okay.
This little one here I can run by myself. Yeah, a flatbed offset press is what this would be called.
Right. But even if it's supposed to be faster, the offset press, you still have to do the wipe down and the inking and the water and the fan and it's not like a Xerox that just keeps going.
Well, yeah, no, you definitely have to be on top of them. Big offset presses that are like the Schnell presses and the presses that are automated have inking and dampening systems on them. So they have rollers that ink the stone goes underneath rollers. One set of rollers has ink on it. The other set of rollers has their sleeves that have a fabric texture on them. They're soaked with water solutions, and then they'll keep the stone wet. So water, ink, back and forth. And then they can run those very fast and then just kind of feed the paper in. Of course, modern day presses, the paper was on a big roll and they just were sheet fed, and everything's automated with little suction cups.
Those are suction? I never thought about that. Interesting. With lithography, the only printing I have done is with True, and it's always been etching. So we have to soak the paper, blot it, so that it's damp for however long. Is lithography the same? Do you have damp paper going through there, or is it dry?
You can.
What's the difference?
Dampened paper, when you're doing multiple runs with color, you have paper registration issues. So if you dampen the paper, it stretches out. The dampened paper sometimes will print richer impressions. So a lot of people like to print with damp paper. If you're just printing like one color, if you're doing multiple colors, we generally have to print dry because the paper gets kind of stretched out more if it's damp. And then it's really hard to register color unless you go back and have to kind of hand register everything and get it locked back into place. But But yeah, certainly people print with damp paper.
It sounds to me like this is like all new to me, people. I hope you're I hope you're with me on this. So it sounds like you've got many more variations of ways to get the image onto the paper in in your world than True does in the etching studio.
I don't know, not necessarily. I mean, etching has a lot of wonderful techniques involved. I consider myself an artist, who's engaged in the print medium. That's, I don't want to be just considered a lithographer. I think that's a trade thing. But we mix everything together in the contemporary world. People put etchings on top of lithos, vice versa, screen prints, digital woodcuts, collaging things, installation-based work. So it's really kind of an open field now with what you do with the work. It's whatever kind of fits the project you want to do. And I like lithography for my own work, but I'm not going to say it's better than etching or woodcut or anything.
I would never say that, Michael.
It is, of course, but I'm actually curious. Going back, you said that this all started because somebody was accusing you of dissonant lithography. What did that stem from, and kind of how was lithography being viewed?
Well, for me, I mean, my deep research has been into Atelier 17 and etching, as I have pawed through bazillions of prints in print rooms all over the world. No, that's not true. In the places that I worked as the catalog person, I was in the boxes all the time. There are lithographs that I think are fantastic, but the flatness of it, it's compared to the sculpturalness of the etching. You can flip the etching over and see the entire image, embossed on the back. And I don't know, I've always loved that tactility to it. And, but there absolutely are lithographs that I think are, just like the Manet of there are examples. I'm like, holy cow. And I love the touche. And, so I guess I was talking out of school that day, and my friend was like, no.
Well, it's interesting that you compare it to, the physical quality of etching, because that's something that I struggled with when I was first starting making lithographs. And how do you achieve that kind of richness of tone? Because, I'd build up etching plates that go into the acid bath 15 times and really build up the cross hatching. And I worked a lot with stippling and, cross hatching, and I'd throw aquatint on. I never really liked aquatint. I always kind of felt it flattened stuff out. That's just my personal bias. But I would try to get the aquatint through the stippling and through the fine detailed drawing. But it had that physical quality, the volume of ink that comes out of an etching plate, to feel it pull off the paper. And that's something I did struggle with. So my lithos, I print 7 to 15 color runs on them to try to compensate for that kind of. That's what I want. I want that kind of richness. So I build up a lot of color layers in my lithos with transparent color runs, in addition to the black key images. But, it is a flatter technique. It's a planographic process, which refers to being flat.
Right, exactly. No, but you're right. I hadn't really put two and two together. I don't know why not. But the richness of the blacks is absolutely a part of my attraction to intaglio, for sure. And you're right, like it's sort of this silvery gray black in litho sometimes, and it's like, where is it? I want to feel it. I want to pet it.
Well, one of the things that really excited me once I got into litho and got into the history of it, and I really love the history and the techniques and process, as you can probably tell from how I'm talking about it. But
that's why I came to you, Michael.
I discovered Rudolf Bresden. He was one of the artists that was shown in grad school when we had our history of litho talk. My history of printmaking class I don't think we got past Durr. We didn't get to lithography. We did have a history of print class at Iowa, which was wonderful. And that, I really wish, I wish I would have had you and True as
Thanks.
I'm really loving your history lectures, and they're fun too. But I discovered Rudolf Bresden's prints, and he was a French artist who worked in the south of France. His famous prints, the Good Le Bon Samaritain, and he drew the stone and brought it up to Paris to be printed by Le Messier.
And it's huge. It's huge.
I have an impression of it. I spent my life savings on and paid off over. It's a late impression. And this summer I was at the Met and I went in and had them pull out some prints, and I asked them to pull out everything they had by Bresden, and they had 2 or 3 different impressions. They kept printing that stone. The early impressions, he worked like an etcher. He scratched, he did a lot of real fine line ink drawing. And so the early impressions are amazing. And there's all these little animals, owls and lizards and creatures. The theme of the print, the Good Samaritan and the camel, are kind of buried down in this landscape. It's like, yeah, who cares about them?
Right.
I want to draw owls and lizards, and there's a dog coming out from underneath the bushes. The stone kept getting printed to the point where they transferred to a second stone, and then his daughter Rudolfina kept publishing the prints. So mine has the Rudolfina stamp, so it's probably after he was dead and after it had been transferred to a second stone, and it's filled in. It's still really I put it in the place where I walk past it every day on the way to the bedroom. Can I stand there and look at it? It's my favorite print ever. The early impressions that they call from the mother stone, the first stone, have some details. It was reworked. I think they printed a couple hundred impressions, and it was reworked after that. There's these little things that show up in the later impressions that are really indicators of which edition it came from or which round it came from. So this little white bird shows up in the bottom, which is claimed to be like an acid. They dropped some acid on the stone or something, and there's a little flaw, and they scratched it into a bird. There's the left leg of the striped-tailed monkey gets filled in and becomes blurry. Then, of course, later on, everything kind of started clogging up, because it's such fine detail work. Part of that is that was printed on a shin clay, and some of them they even did almost like a double clay. And then they did tint stones, so they would print these tint colors. They'd print like a really transparent gray or a tan color and then print the black image over top of that and give it that kind of richness. So when I started seeing some of these early prints that were done like that, that really kind of set me on fire. And it's like, this is the way I need to work. I need to do these tint stones and these transparent layers and build up that richness. And that's why, going back to the dry printing, you can lock in the registration really tight. And I use pins usually so I can get, it's kind of like with Huck's chiaroscuro woodcuts. I'm sure they probably have to print those dry and have some pins or some sort of real tight registration so the image doesn't get blurry.
I think the Baltimore Museum, if I'm remembering properly, they definitely have at least one of the Good Samaritans, but I think they had 2, and one had a tint stone behind it, and I feel like it was sort of tan yellowish. But I don't think I knew. This is the thing that I would like somebody to do, is to accumulate all of that kind of knowledge. Like, watch out for the little bird in the bottom, and that means this. Like, there's a trick for almost every artist, and if we could get all of the dealers to cough up their secrets about the artist they know really well, and you to cough up Bresden, because there's so much. Jesus, Lord have mercy.
It was really fun because the Met had one of the early impressions without the little bird in it, and it was so gorgeous. And then the one with the little bird at the bottom is still printed very beautifully. They're still just as good. There's just certain differences in them. When you get down the road after it was transferred onto a second stone, of course, it's just like making a Xerox over and over again. It starts to degenerate. But they would go back in and fix things up. And then there's the famous Rauschenberg stone, the stone broke during printing, and they transfer that to a second stone, and Rauschenberg drew in the little pile at the bottom.
Yeah, that's a classic in the history of prints. Let's us talk about Bob Blackburn, because he gets just not enough airtime in my book, because I mean, he was in the thick of it completely in mid-century New York, and he was the one who figured out, well, he was the one who broke it, I guess, but he also figured out how to make it work.
Yeah, so there's all this wonderful history to it. And the interesting thing with lithography is we know the history pretty clearly, because Sennefelder documented everything and patented it and released a book. And in 1818, he republished his treatise in lithography. And there's image samples in the back that he showed what you could do with it. There's like knights jousting, there's scenes of landscapes and
right.
The sheet music, the calligraphy text, little studies of crayon drawings and showing the tonal range you can achieve, little grayscales, and the history of all the different levels of reproduction. Lithography did go through that spell of going to the reproductive print. Lithography did get a bad name for being a print process that was commonly used to reproduce works, especially in the 60s, 70s or so. Lithographs were just being kind of cranked out by a lot of these different shops.
Before that, lithography is so intertwined with commercial printing for so long that it's I think there's sometimes been a struggle to demarcate some division between fine artist produced prints and the printing that goes on the label of your jam jar, which is the same as silkscreen or screen printing. Excuse me. Whew. Screen printing. This is the intertwining of the commercial part has always been a struggle for the artists. They're like, hey, wait. We are different, although the process is exactly the same. Yeah.
I wouldn't really categorize what the master printers do with artists as a reproductive print process, because you were talking a bit about that in one of your previous episodes, because there's a collaboration that goes on there. I think of the old Hanko ink ad, which is great. This guy is sitting there with a suit coat on and his top hat's on the table, and he's sitting there drawing on a litho stone, and there's a portrait of George Washington up in front of him, a painting, and he's copying the painting onto a stone while the printers are printing like the red layer and he's drawing the blue layer. Lithography was really used to reproduce works of the time. I have a Franz Hauptstangl print of a painting of Franz Snyder's that was in the Dresden Gallery. I think that with the way the master printers are working with artists, there's typically, there's a dialogue that goes on, and it's a conversation, and it really is a collaboration. I've never wanted to be a master printer, but I have great respect for people that do it and the expertise. And I always think they kind of get left in the shadows.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
There's so many, and I have a lot of friends that are master printers and have done it or doing it still. And you see the work in shows, and it's like, it's maybe the shop gets listed, but usually the printers just kind of, there's the workers behind the scenes. So I think it's nice when you see the recognition of the people that were involved in it, because it's our research, it's our training, it's our expertise. And
it's hard because, and I've said this before on the podcast, that at the museum, when you were doing a show and there were some prints in a larger context, that it was felt that having all of that stuff, the publishers basically, would be too confusing for the viewer to take in. But that if it was a print show, you could dive deep and do that. But it gets so complicated, because I was talking to Julia DeMario, and she was talking about plates that she had helped work on with Aldo Chromolink. So he was on the plate, but she printed them. So there's a further division, who made the stone or the plate and who was on the press. So there's it's so much information. I agree with you. It's a lot further.
Especially when you get a team of people involved, and it's just like, are you going to put the sponger,
exactly.
But being a sponger takes a lot of, that's really a skill. Like when I have people assist me in printing, and I have to train them for like half an hour to sponge the plate right. Now it's too wet, it's too dry, it's too wet, there's streaks. When I sponge for other people, so you're just sponging, the sponger sponges the stone in between the ink passes so that the stone stays wet. You have to keep an eye on things and how you roll the ink, and but there's so many aspects to it. I understand. It's just, and you see the old master prints, like that came out of the shops of Engelmann. They're, even Sennefelders, they'll have, Engelmann's name will be written on the print. It's like, did Engelmann physically print this? Probably no. He had a factory of printers, standing around those stones and slaving.
Yeah. So just so people know, True and I will get to reproductive prints as it applies to later time periods, including lithography. So we didn't get to any of the sort of 19th century amazing reproductive prints of the Mona Lisa or whatever, but we will get there. So everybody be patient.
I grew up in the middle of the sticks of Michigan, so I didn't have a lot of art around me. I had reproductions of things. And of course, one of the real popular things of recent decades have been the wildlife prints, which are almost all offset lithography, photographically reproduced from the original painting. And now the geek clay, the fine art inkjet prints, editions of 5,000. I have some old Delacroix or Jerichos that were drawn by other artists based on their sketches, and they're just phenomenal. I mean, they're hand drawn, hand printed from stone. And they're so gorgeous. It's just like that. And so that was a way for a lot of people to have access to those artists and be able to collect their work. They couldn't afford an original.
Sure, of course. Not to mention illustrated books like the Doré Bible and all of those. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
So we haven't gotten to your own work. So let's talk about you. Tell us about your work. Show and tell time, people.
Well, this is what I'm working on at the moment. This is a battle scene. So, Palaiolos, Battle of the Dudes. My work is, from my head, from my personal stories. It's a big potpourri, smorgasbord of the things going on around me and feed into my life. So the recent work, maybe it's more of a reaction to political, social climates and just all the struggles going on between different factions of the world and resurgence of totalitarianism and invasions of peaceful countries and, Ukraine and just our politics at home here and right wing, left wing, and no middle ground. It's one or the other. And so I felt like I needed to draw a big gob of white guys beating each other up with rocks. being a white guy myself, and I figured I can draw the white guys beating each other up with
so
clubs.
It's after the Palaiuolo battle of the 10 male nudes, everybody, which I'll post a picture of in the show notes.
It's also, I've been looking at a lot of the Ashcan school, George Bellows, and I fell in love with Robert Riggs'
yes,
work. And he's from Milliken, Illinois. He went to Milliken College. It's Milliken University now. I believe the story is he ran away from home to join the circus. So he has these beautiful circus images and did them in lithography. He also has a bunch of boxers that were, I believe, influenced by Bellows. They're kind of in the same feel. Then he did a really wonderful series. It was a commissioned series of children's ward. They're really creepy prints.
Super creepy. Yeah.
And I've collected all but the accident ward. The accident ward is a little tougher image for me to get into, but I have actually collected the other ones. He printed with those tint stones I was talking about. So a lot of those prints of Robert Riggs were printed in two colors. They're printed in a real transparent. You can't even hardly see it's there, but it just makes the image much richer. And then there's a lot of kind of that Manier noir, this reductive drawing in there. The Ashcan school is kind of about that, drawing the everyday life, the dinginess and toughness of everyday life.
But yours are pretty fantastical.
I looked at a lot of Bosch and Burgel once I got into college and learned who they were. So yeah, my work goes to that. I was probably born in the wrong century, but my work has a lot of influence of the Northern Renaissance, and I love those fantastical worlds. I love that you started talking about, what was it? Fungus that grows in rye.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I had never heard of it. Ergotism.
Ergotism.
Yes.
Yeah. I was like, wow, maybe I drink too much rye whiskey. I don't know. But yeah, my work really comes from my head. My figures are really drawn from imagination. I've done a lot of observational figure drawing. So to me, that's not what I'm going for. I'm going for the kind of the psychological essence of the narrative.
So I feel like I've talked to people who work in surrealist manners, and you could call yours surreal because it's not actually real, right? But that they just think it's kind of cool, where I think there's so many layers to how psychologically an artist would, you're basically laying out a whole world that's a parallel universe to ours, in which very strange things happen, but also commenting on our own current state of being, right?
Yeah, I've talked about in the past, it's almost kind of the psychological state. These figures are trapped in a world where they are enslaved in that world. They're locked into it, and they're maybe not even aware that they're locked into it. It's sort of the daily grind. You're working every day of your life on a job that's 9 to 5, and you're just kind of in this cyclical, you go through this cyclical routine, and a lot of people don't even have the chance to kind of break out of that routine in life because they're focused on making a living and paying the bills, just getting by. So a lot of these figures are stuck in these kind of menial tasks. Sometimes they're just they're sitting there piling rocks, moving things from point A to point B. It's also about communication, lack of communication at all levels between individuals, as well as between talking about right and left, political views. There's just kind of a lot of commentary on humans' ability to communicate with each other and just be humane. The human condition. There's humor in it. Some people think it's maybe a little too dark and I'm depressed all the time, but I put a lot of dark humor into it, and I kind of have a cynical view of things myself. So,
well, there's a futility to the labor, sort of this never getting anywhere in your circumstance thing that's going on. And there's the absurdity thing, but they are so moody. When I look at them, I can imagine a film, an animation that's all of these things going on, and I don't know what the narrative would be, but they're so evocative for me.
Yeah, I guess there is an element of suspense where I do want the viewer to kind of bring their own story to it, and also be a bit confused by it. I don't want to give away all the personal details. There's a lot of little personal stories that I embed into pieces, and sometimes there's just absurdity. You really hit it on the head. That's one of the things I think a lot about my work, is just how absurd humanity is sometimes. And so I'll come up with little relationships in the pieces, or interactions between different elements, and I just sit there and kind of chuckle to myself as I'm drawing them.
You have that in common with Huck, I think. So if a person is interested in your work, are you represented by a gallery, or do you have things that are available out there in the world?
Yeah, I'm represented by Davidson Galleries in Seattle, and Brumfield Gallery in Astoria, Oregon. They were in Boise, Idaho for a time, and then they were in Cannon Beach, and then they moved up to Astoria. So during the pandemic, they closed their gallery, and they were called Imprint Gallery for a while in Cannon Beach. That's where the haystacks are out in the water, where they filmed the Goonies.
Oh, okay, all right.
I haven't been up to Astoria. I've been in some shows at the gallery since it's relocated, but I haven't had a chance. One of these days.
Okay. So you've been teaching a long time. Are you on the road to planning for thinking about what comes next? I mean, you're younger than I am, so I don't want to say retirement, but you've been teaching a long time.
You can say it. It is something I'm thinking about. I love the teaching. I'm not going to say I love academia, administration. I've been a graduate coordinator for a long time, and I'm stepping out of that. And that kind of stuff just tires you out. And so maybe that's what my work is about, being graduate coordinator. But I really loved working with the students I've worked with over the years, and I keep in touch with a lot of them, and they're all over the country, and some are international. Current students I have are fantastic. So, and I'll keep doing it as long as I still enjoy that part of it. And that's really what I have a sabbatical plan for next year, that I hope to get away from school a little bit and get back to doing some of my own work. That's the danger of being in academia, is you can get really pulled away from a consistent studio practice. And I've had a lot of talks with Huck about this. It's like, get the hell out of there. But it's like, yeah, it pays the bills, and I do enjoy the teaching part. It kept me engaged with a dialogue with the community of other printmakers that I enjoy. It's pretty cool. You have a job where you can do what you love and have people around that you can talk about what you love. And if it gets to the point where there's no people around that love what I love anymore, then I think that's probably time to move on. But
fair enough.
Another few years. Right. I have at least another 5-6 years left in me.
Okay, all right. Hear you.
I would love to have just all the time in the world to make my work. That would be lovely. But
I mean, even Huck, in his amazing ability to be an artist full time without extra teaching and other things, it's a hustle. He hustles.
Yeah. And it's also, there's a balance that you need in life. When I do residencies, that's really the time when I go someplace. Like the last one I did was before the pandemic. I was in Munich for 2 months straight. That's where I did that series that's in the St. Louis Art Museum collection. It just gives me a time to really, you're in a bit of a vacuum and just really focus your thoughts. That's what I need in periods of time, but I also need that balance where you can only sustain that for so long, and then you need the influences to start coming back in. If you're working as a, purely as a full-time artist, the hustle of writing grants, getting your work out there to the people that need to see it, the collectors, the museums, the merch, the peripheral things that, support the practice. Huck does a lot of the print fairs. There is definitely a hustle. He's always been amazing at, having a team of people that work with him. A number of my students have worked with him, and everybody just loves it. I've worked down at the Evil Prints with James Ehlers and Sean Starwars. Tom had us in before the pandemic and before he moved to his current studio. And it was fun. It was when the Penthouse interview came out. And so there's this constant energy in the shop, and it's like, wow, this is fun. I'm a different kind of person. I'm a little more of a hermit, so I kind of have my little cave here in St. Charles, Illinois.
You and Ellers remind me of it. You both have really dry senses of humor, and I think you do tend to be insular when you're working, as opposed to Huck. And I can only imagine what that scene looked like with you and Sean. And
It was fun because it was, and I was going to mention James because I've known him for a long time. James is sitting there quietly engraving his plates. I'm sitting over there working on my litho stones. Sean's out in the middle of the room talking, and hands going. Huck's in the back room, and everybody. It was just really fun. It was a fun week. So, and those guys have been my friends for years, and so it's always Huck and Bill Fick and the whole crew. It's fun when we have a chance to get together. So,
are you a bona fide member of the Outlaw Printmakers?
I was part of the first show that was organized in New York as Tony Fitzpatrick's. I can't remember the year, but I had some work in that one, and I've been part of a few of the things over the years. So I haven't really. I'm sort of a peripheral outlaw.
Okay.
So.
Because they're coming to the Baltimore Print Fair.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sort of the quiet guy that hangs out in the back. And
yes, but we could get your lithographs in front of some East Coast people.
That sounds good.
You should call them. Tom!
I still feel like an outlaw at times. So.
I don't think we've covered everything, but I think we've covered most of it. Did I not ask you something you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, my plans for next year, I met Patrick Wagner, who runs Blackheart Press in Sweden. And I hope to go over and do some work with Patrick, hopefully, and maybe go back to Germany and visit some spots. I've been on these pilgrimages. I actually visited the stone quarries in Germany when I was there, and Sennefelder's grave. And so next year, hopefully I can get out and do some fun projects and make a lot of work. So
you are a print geek, after all.
I am. I will admit it.
That's the other thing you and Huck. I mean, I think a lot of printmakers are attuned to the history of what has come before them, but you and Huck rival each other in your knowledge base, so it's impressive.
He's an encyclopedia, though. I have a bad memory. I'll say, that artist that did that stuff.
Well, yeah, and then you get Tom and True in the room together, and
I know those two were.
It was scary.
I was trying to now who's speaking now?
Yeah, it was a lot. But
that was the first time they met. They seemed like they'd known each other for years.
Exactly, as I knew it would be.
Very fun. We'll say hi to True.
I will. Yeah. If people want to follow you on the Instagram, what's your handle?
I think it's just Michael Barnes 333.
Thank you for coming on Platemark. It's been great talking to you. It's been really great.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Platemark with Michael Barnes today. He was a joy to talk to. I loved hearing him geek out on all things lithography. Thank you to him for being a most wonderful guest, and thank you as always to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. As I noted at the top, any images that Michael and I talk about will be over on the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. You'll also find over there a support and donate button for you to click and support the good work of Platemark, which is basically me. Next time, I don't know what's going to happen next time, but, I'm sure it'll be good. So, all right, we will see you next time.